Hangin with Mr. Douglas.
Welcome, 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 everyone. On this episode, we go deep, we go dark, we go doom. Known as the original father of doom, he asks razor-sharp and deep-cutting questions. An OG host master, along with his amazing crystal-clear position doomer master partner and frequent co-host Fringe, running long-form spaces and conversations on X like Olympians. I've been listening and learning from them for years. With scalpel-like incisions, he takes a clear-eyed, deep-stabbing stare into the look of catastrophism, consciousness, the dark alien NHI agendas, abduction mechanics, whistleblower issues, government secrecy, geopolitics, hidden history, the geomagnetic pole shifting situation, and the phenomena at large. He's justifiably skeptical of the easily digestible, optimistic narratives. With fire in his eyes, looking at the fire in the skies, we are here for a most dangerous conversation. Ulrich, D MerDaddy, thank you for hanging, man. Thank you.
My goodness, Douglas, what a polished and flattering intro. Thank you very much, man.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the invite, and thank you for caring about the art of conversation and what I think is the most important topic in the world.
That makes two of us. Amen to that. This is tip of the spear when it comes to how we move forward as human beings, as beings existing in this time and space. And nothing more important than being front-faced and conversing with all cards on the table as best we can when it comes to what you so eloquently address time after time live on X Spaces. So to begin, I would just like to wade in gently just a little bit and ask, how did you first encounter the UFO alien NHI situation? Go way, way back.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer your question in three ways, right? So I'll answer it in the last part. I'll answer the third part is how and why did I get into ufology research? Because surprisingly, it's a very different reason than why I encountered the phenomenon. I am an experiencer, and I don't bring it up because it's usually either harmful or orthogonal or not relevant to the point I'm trying to make. So I try to ask myself, what is the result that I'm trying to achieve out of the conversation that I'm trying to have, whether I'm hosting or speaking. So there's, why did I choose to go into ufology research? How did I encounter or interact with the phenomenon, or why? And then there is, sort of your implicit question is, was I interested in UFOs early on as a kid, right? Like,
yes.
So if we start like, did I have an interest, or what's my background? There's a lot in my life that points towards the typical, oh, I'm interested in esoteric stuff, fringe stuff, Carl Jung. And I've always cared deeply about science and I grew up in Germany, right? So Germans are kind of a weird phenomenon because culturally we associate them with psychopathy, brilliant mastermindedness, Nazis and UFOs, right? But I need to tell you, man, growing up as and this is not part of my identity, right? But growing up as an African American, half German in Germany, growing up in Germany, I had American teachers shipped in from America at a public school. It was a John F. Kennedy, ironically, right? I went to a JFK high school, never associated JFK with aliens once in my life, right? Because when you go to a high school called John F. Kennedy, it's not like the principal says, by the way, they killed him because he disclosed the truth on aliens, right? That was missing from my education. And although Germans absolutely internalize a lot of, well, it's not rightful that Germans that had nothing to do with it internalize a lot of guilt, but rightfully they will be open about the dark history of World War II. So, you learn everything about World War II, gas chambers, you'll do trips over there. But nobody's going to talk about Nazis and aliens. Nobody's going to talk about Die Glocke or the magnetohydrodynamics of Mercury or over unity physics. And growing up in Germany, I need to tell you that generally speaking, it's a culture of severe scientific materialist reductionism, not a place of Teslarian wonder and magic of energy, vibrancy, and frequency, of vibrancy, vibration, and frequency. And so my experience of the German culture is one not where I feel like I didn't experience Germans as creative, renegade, occult, Nordic channeling, Promethean pioneers. I experienced Germans. My German physics teacher, I remember, was it seventh grade? I think it was seventh grade. She said, and this was in German. I'll do a German accent.
Nice.
Welcome everybody to physics. I'm here to tell you that basically everything has already been discovered in physics, and there will be no new discoveries. Right? That's on the first day.
Welcome to class. We've got it. Yeah.
We've got it. Yeah. Yeah. All of the other stuff you can go into biology if you want to still figure things out, but in physics, it's all pretty much already there. So, and so I was very passionate about science in a culture that had exsanguinated all of the mysteries of science. And so I was an anomaly from that standpoint. And I need to be honest with you, these cliches are very frustrating. The idea that if you say there's some statistical rigor to parapsychology, that you're some woo-tard and you just believe that everything is crystals and patchouli, but also the idea that if you acknowledge the phenomenon, but then also try to be scientifically principled or at least logically grounded, that somehow you're a debunker. In some spaces, you might realize that most of the time a conversation isn't really had, because in ufology, a lot of people have dug their heels into a paradigm so deeply that you would think in ufology that you would have the most open-minded people willing to entertain the craziest ideas and at least have the conversation. And what you find is those people absolutely exist, but ufology does seem to be, to some degree, a regressive high school lunch table cafeteria situation, where the first thing people want to know is what table you're sitting at, and they care less of whether or not the food you're eating is poisoned with arsenic. Meaning, people aren't really doing the science of ufology, broadly speaking, which I find a shame, because you often have really smart people not using their intellectual capital. So, to answer your question, and I'll round it out quicker. I grew up in a culture where I think my parents sort of represent a bit of the paradox. My mom is Baptist, Christian, Black, and I would label her lovingly and unlovingly religious but not spiritual. And my dad, white, native German, he was atheist, but he was not rational. So my dad was rational, was atheist but not rational. My mom was religious but not spiritual. And I think it was very much the opposite. I think it was very clear that there was something going on in our universe that science, to a large degree, actually had the tools to wrestle with, but wasn't. And it often was the most important subjects of parapsychology, of the obvious increasing complexity in evolution that is taking place, right? So whether you're a creationist or not, there's clearly something that is engineering or is tending toward more and more complexity. And science has the tools to wrestle with it, and it just doesn't want to touch it. And so to that degree, and really not more, somebody who's just interested in the forbidden parts that science wouldn't tackle and also care deeply about science, to that degree, I was interested in UFO adjacent topics. But I'll be honest with you, up until around 2017, 2018, my default assumption was that there absolutely are no aliens here, but I also didn't care deeply to argue with it. I would have listened to somebody's argument, but my understanding was that obviously if something was here, we couldn't keep the secret in terms of government. And you wouldn't be able to ignore the people who had those kinds of encounters, right? Although I did believe in the paranormal, that there was some weird interaction between consciousness and the world we have outside. And then it was in me trying to honestly address a medical situation um, that got me into psychedelics. And right around 2017, 2018, we don't just have a ufology, a change in ufology, right? We have Elizondo speaking out, coming out, and we have the New York Times article.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, around the same time, and I don't think it's coincidental, we have a renaissance of psychedelics, where all of a sudden something has happened in the culture, and we're like, let's take another look at psychedelics. And now we're doing a whole repetition of old research we had done, learning the same insights, but sort of trying to counter the stigma. And I think people should take a moment and ask themselves, like, why does that even happen? Why are there moments in history where decades can go by and everything remains stagnant, and then all of a sudden it's like everybody wakes up at the same time and says, maybe we were wrong about this, and it's just a trend. And it is in realizing that we all have internalized assumptions about the world, just like we all had about psychedelics. That was my similar relationship to UFOs. So it was my interest in self-treating myself, where the medical system had failed with psychedelics, where I had to really put aside my biases, get into the research and learn, and teach myself the topics that were not taught in regular academia and regular science when it came to the mind, neuroscience, and psychedelics, where I was forced to do the same thing with UFOs, because if you get deep enough into psychedelics, you may eventually hear about, read about, or actually do DMT. And the difference between doing any kind of psychedelic and DMT is kind of like the difference between being driven in a Porsche or driving a Porsche
Mm.
and flying a spaceship or being abducted in a spaceship.
Oh, okay.
It's that much of a difference, right? And if you actually have a DMT encounter that is deep enough, meaning the dose is high enough, and you have enough of your consciousness still there, you're still present, you will experience entity contact, and that contact will be telepathic, and it will also be bidirectional. And even if you don't see a UFO, I've never, I've seen stuff in the sky that may or may not have been, but I've never seen like, oh my goodness, this is a UFO. Once you have 20, 30 repeat experiences with with an entity that you have confirmed, even to the point of physical manifestation, that it is not a projection of the mind. Well, you don't have to see a UFO to believe in UFOs if you've interacted with aliens, or at least another intelligence. And so, that's what got me into having some sort of first contact experience. And then finally, what got me into ufology research is actually the opposite. So I care deeply about understanding what I thought was a human phenomenon, which is cluster B personality disorders, specifically narcissism. And it was a very personal, domestic thing. I was like an engineer. I was like, this is a problem. This must have some sort of a solution. And I just wanted to figure out, how do you make a relationship with a narcissist work? Let's
Mm.
say they're, the parent of one of your children. 15% of the American population is officially diagnosed with a cluster B personality disorder. That's almost 1 out of 6. So everybody's playing Russian roulette, whether they realize it or not. Most of the reason we have laws, I would argue, to begin with in the first place, is due to this 1/6 of the population. And we have, as a society and as a mental health field, we've been way too complacent with our failure to understand and treat orders of psychoticism. And although they're not classified as orders of disorders, as disorders of psychoticism, they absolutely are. They exist on a continuum, on a spectrum of psychosis. And that was one of the big things that it took me about 2 years to figure out. And it was in really trying to solve at the very least, fully understand and penetrate what I thought was a human problem. That this was a threat I did not expect to take me into catastrophism. So I'll say that again. It was my research in narcissism that led me to a forced, amateurish understanding of geophysics, Sumerian tablets, ancient astronaut theory, and DNA and artificial intelligence, because they all have a similar problem, which is when the Sumerians are not the Sumerians, the Anuna or the Anunnaki are trying to create a slave, a Lulu, some sort of slave drone. They have the problem that they need to create it not too powerful that they can't control it, but smart enough that it can take instructions. And so it's very akin to our problem of AI. In AI, we're trying to create artificial consciousness. In the beginning, we were trying to create artificial intelligence without being artificially conscious. Then we realized you have to be retarded because you can't really have something that's intelligent that isn't, at least to some level, artificially conscious. And so our relationship today as humans to AI is almost perfectly congruent to the relationship between the Anuna and the humans when they're trying to trap lightning in a bottle, creating something so that they can liberate themselves from some sort of slavery or having to do the work themselves. And this is also the problem in narcissism, because narcissism is a disorder where there's an allergy to self-reflection. So the reason why narcissists are almost impossibly treated through traditional psychotherapy is because traditional psychotherapy, even though it takes forever, sometimes 10 to 20 years, the mechanism by which it is successful is through the gaining of insight, and the patient recognizes that there are internalized thoughts or beliefs that they had that actually defy reality, that are actually psychotic, that they fully embrace and is bringing about the pain in their life. And narcissism, for instance, is one of the personality disorders where there is an entire construct, an entire altar, you could say, that the person creates within themselves in order to avoid reflection of their self. So you kind of have an MK Ultra situation. And so you have the inverse problem of artificial intelligence. You have the narcissist has, despite having, consciousness, genuine consciousness, they've created an artificial, non-reflective consciousness, which is what makes treatment so intransigent. Does that make sense? So these three areas, they bled into each other. And the most successful treatment we have for narcissists is actually transference-focused psychotherapy, TFP. And for those who don't know what transference is, it's where the patient projects their own relationship that they usually have with an intimate partner onto the therapist, and the therapist begins to experience what that other person actually experiences. So if the narcissist is abusing a boyfriend or girlfriend, the therapist finally is starting to be treated like that boyfriend or girlfriend. But even more importantly, some of the insights that the therapist gleans in order to treat narcissism is countertransference. And countertransference is absolutely wild. It is where the emotion that is split off, the very authentic aspects of self that the narcissist doesn't want to, and in some cases cannot physically feel, even the thoughts, the therapist experiences it as their own. The therapist needs to be so self-reflective as to catch it and accurately attribute it to the patient, and then develop insights about the psyche of the patient in order to further a treatment of this. And the fact that this was, and this was 2022, 2023, the fact that this was the most successful therapeutic technique in treating narcissists, which was literally a form of emotion and cognitive projection telepathy going on, just unacknowledged. We're talking about literal telepathy that is being operationally used in the treatment of a patient, and we're just not calling it by its actual name. This was really what forced me into ufology research, which was years, 3 to 4 years after I had my first contact experience. and none of my ufology research was motivated by trying to figure out whether the phenomenon was real. I had already known the phenomenon exists, it's here, but I did not know how intimately and incestuously interwoven it was into every fabric of society that we presumptively accept as human. So I'm very sorry for the very long answer,
No, that was
but
awesome.
that's
Wow.
the only way to give you an honest answer.
Thank you. And that was deep and thick, and I appreciate it. I am fascinated by the machinations of the mind, and you opened several new doors for me. Thank you very much. Also, what insight? Yes, basically just unlabeled telepathy when it comes to that kind of deep connection that a therapist has to make in order to begin to understand and then try to make sense of what's happening within someone else's interior life. Like you said, that is wow. And yeah, what a path to move toward the NHI situation. Thank you for sharing that. That is, I very much appreciate it. That was really wild. So then, now I'm just deeply curious. What was that next step, going from then your understanding of how this experience of uh, moving through a narcissist perspective, trying to understand the interaction that they would have with others and then their own internal interaction, to then picking up the psi component and then recognizing that this stuff is stitched throughout society. Talk more about that and how you connect it to and great fold over when it comes to the Annunaki story creating a easily controllable being, and how now we are moving toward doing something very similar, if not pretty much the same thing with AI, where we needed to be smart, but just smart enough and no smarter.
Well, and that's a perfect place to pick up from the Anunnaki, because look, I mean, the what I'm really interested also to hear from you is, you know, what parts of this subject, or how you or your friends or the culture is wrestling with it. I'm also interested to hear from you, like, what things um really baffle you or just bother you. There's a bunch of stuff that bothers me, but there's a difference, but there's there's a difference in a ufologist or the experiencer who is trying to figure out, a, is this stuff even real, right? So I'm sure you've sort of caught that the bar for disclosure is a bottomless pit, like it's being lowered further and further, right? But I mean, we used to talk about, do we want catastrophic disclosure or controlled disclosure? Now disclosure just means just tell us they're fucking here, even without proof, right? And so we're sort of, we kind of have a slave mentality in ufology where we're begging for crumbs at this point,
Yes.
right? And so one of the things that everybody sort of needs to decide for themselves and not assume that it's uniform within and without ufology is, why are you here? Like, what are you trying to figure out? Are you just trying to figure out, is the phenomenon real? Is there something here? Are some of these craft made of physical material? Are they all projections of the mind? And then politically or culturally, like, what do you want? Right. And so many people in ufology have had some sort of experience. They know it's real, and they actually don't care about disclosure for the sake of epistemological or ontological confirmation. They want the fucking world to change. A lot of us want the world to change. And I'm just going to be honest, because everybody's trying to be careful and walk on eggshells. But the only real benefit of a presidential moment of confirmation is so that the stupid fucking normies can move along the 50% of the needle and we can see the world change,
Mm-hmm.
right? So those stupid four words, you know, in terms of the conversation, they don't really matter whether they come from a president or not. But in terms of the political environment, they do mean a lot, because it means you're not going to get ostracized from your job when you talk about basic reality. It means, you know, you don't need to ask yourself, if you come on a podcast, am I going to use my real name or am I going to be pseudonymous? And the consequences for the marketplace, what you study, academia. So just, even if you're not somebody who's dependent on permission, the fact that the world gives you permission unlocks money. It unlocks a broader conversation. And that brings us to the actual issue of narcissism. The in narcissism, if anybody is a narcissist, it's unlikely they'll admit it, but if anybody has experience with narcissistic personalities, you'll experience the phenomenon of censorship, where the narcissist has a need to determine what it is you're thinking and saying. And we really have to ask ourselves, you know, what's going on there. So there seems to be an allergy to genuine individuals, to genuine individuation. You have to think like this, you have to talk like this. And if you have a different opinion than I do, the difference of that opinion is experienced by the narcissist as abusive. In fact, even if reality has a different opinion, that's not abusive unless you point out that reality, right? So the narcissist cares more about the reality that gets talked about, where the light is shown on it, that gets exposed. The narcissist, and this is clinically true, the narcissist cares more about perception than reality. And when we're dealing with the 20 to 40,000 plus cuneiform tablets, what I would argue extraterrestrial narcissism is slapping you in the face. Even though it's, even the mistranslated cuneiform is slapping you in the face. And we have to ask ourselves this question. We have to. And many people, it's not even a thought for most people. Hypothetically, if we have beings that either lived way, way longer, or both lived way, way longer and came from outside of our solar system or from a neighboring planet, and they really contributed to or even wrote the Sumerian tablets, and I'm not saying what's in the Sumerian tablets is the truth, all right? Let's say it's all counterintelligence. In this thought experiment, if the Sumerian tablets, or at least the style and the knowledge that birthed civilization, is coming from this intelligence, what are the implications that this intelligence is bearing a narcissistic stage of ego development? Right? And it was in my recognition that the relationship, the psychological relationship of envy and pride, narcissistic envy and pride, and need for total coercive control, not just of behavior, but also of knowledge, of belief, of worship. A Munchausen by proxy, pathological love relationship between the Annuna and the humans had severe implications for this modern state of disclosure. Because just like a narcissist will sometimes unintentionally tell you who they truly are, the Annuna, intentionally and unintentionally, have told us repeatedly that at least some of them have an absolute disgust for humanity, for the very reason of our genetic tie to them. So we have tablets that are at least heavily suggesting not only a genetic hybridization of another intelligence and a manipulation of our genetics, but possibly even soul transfer and soul recycling. That's at the very least, that is a heavy implication of the thousands and thousands of Sumerian tablets. And at the same time, we have, and I have OCD, by the way. I'm not, and I'm not shitting on narcissists. narcissism is a really real mental health issue, and we need to be able to comfortably talk about it without saying that when we use a word, it's tantamount to diagnosing people with it. We don't do this with depression. We don't do this with anxiety disorders. But for some reason, when we talk about borderlines, narcissists, and people with antisocial personality disorder, we act like we need a medical degree just to be able to use the term, right? So if we just talk about these qualities without diagnosing people, we have to ask ourselves, why do almost all of our religions have beings that are behaving and talking from a narcissistic mental point of origin, and the relationship that they have to the origin story of man, to cyclical cataclysms, and a technological disparity, all three of them? Why does narcissism keep popping up? And it was also in my research in the mental health disorder of what they now call factitious disorder imposed on another. Just a mouthful. It just means Munchausen syndrome by proxy. The phenomenon where, in rare cases, parents will try to invent a sickness or cause a sickness, or manufacture the diagnosis of a sickness, or just withhold health and nutrition for their children in order to receive a bunch of attention from society and from doctors, and in many cases actually end up killing the children. What is going on here? And at the same time, just like the narcissist who said, you're the first person who never abused them, you're the best lover in their life, and the next moment they're saying you're the worst abuser ever in their life. This is going on in human history, where there is a narcissistic pride for being the originators and the creators of man that is not only local to this planet. There are pyramids on the moon. There are pyramids on Mars with an OCD-like precision to suggest, hey, they're basically pissing on trees and saying we are leaving our mark here. And where people get all hung up is on the technological marvel that these are all so geometrically aligned. And it's also a bit of a false herring. People should be hung up on the fact that something long ago knew what material to choose to persist through the ages and through the cataclysms. Because the most technologically impressive thing, paradoxically, would be the thing that we don't have any remnant or any evidence of. So in general, the more technologically advanced a society is, the more the proof of that technological or scientific development will be in some sort of material that does not withstand the tests of time. If you take a look around you right now, whether it's an amazing conversation or an extraordinary state of mind or superior DNA, the evidence, generally speaking, of extreme development is going to be inversely proportional to a material that actually withstands the test of time. So the persistence or existence of any evidence, it actually runs counter to any testament toward highly developed or highly underdeveloped. We should not be suspicious of pyramids for their technological development. We should be suspicious of pyramids because we have evidence of them at all, right? Because something chose to move granite hundreds of miles as opposed to any other material that would not have persisted. If the pyramids were made of titanium, we wouldn't be seeing them right now, right? Now, if we saw pyramids made of titanium, we'd be like, oh my goodness, how'd they make titanium? That's a space age material. Titanium would have oxidized over a couple thousands of years. So these beings had knowledge that far transcended what was needed to create titanium. They actually knew that the civilizational cycle would only last about 6,000 years, and they need these pyramids to last over multiple cycles because they have a narcissistic need to shove ownership in people's faces. So that's what came about it when I was listening to Matthew LaCroix on the Julian Dory podcast, and I realized that what we're seeing in narcissism, when these people will have petty fights with you and will exhaust you and will twist your words and need you to not be an individual, and would rather even self-sabotage their their own dreams just in order to manipulate a fictitious reality, just for the sake of perception, where success and reality and morality and intelligence, where everything is being sacrificed just due to a regressive, underdeveloped ego. I realized that we're witnessing a remnant of an extraterrestrial psychology of people or of beings that are used to living for hundreds of thousands of years. The reason why the phenomenon, what we think of as a human phenomenon, which is really a genetic remnant of extraterrestrial psychology, is so alien and so hard to understand, is that because the person is behaving like somebody who lives way longer than just 100 years, right? So when you're fighting with that person, what are they behaving like? They're behaving like the Annuna, who will have stupid petty fights and hijack people just to have wars because their idols were offended and they need everybody to be killed in the village, right? This is what we're dealing with here. When you see people turn violent and you have the narcissistic rage and the snake eyes where the pupils go black, right? Now we're into demonic possession here. When you see this, we're dealing with an alien psychology that has become regressive for the very reason of technological superiority. So once you reach a singularity level of technology, you basically reach all of the other technological singularities, and you're not living in a world anymore where you have to work 40 hours a week and you barely can pay taxes, and you only have this many years to go to school before you find a woman or a man, probably the wrong one, divorce them, and then next thing you know, you're near the end of life. If you're living in a world where everybody's living hundreds of thousands of years and money isn't an issue, what is the currency? It's status and it's people's opinion, right? It's the currency becomes like a Real Housewives Bravo TV currency. But that's the irony here.
Yeah.
The irony of and I'm not against extreme technological development, but you have to realize that you can have both be true, that you can have underdeveloped psychology, underdeveloped spiritual and emotional development that is the result of having solved all of your problems where you're not facing any trauma, and produce a species that is living hundreds of thousands of years because they're not facing cataclysms that are resetting their civilizations. And then when they try to chain of what would be the equivalent of AI and have to impose devolution and regression, namely humans, what is happening to us? We're getting born and we're realizing very early on that we have to deal with mortality. And this does something to the psyche. And at least in the positive sense, it forces an accelerated evolution of ego development. So we are dealing with a species here that, although it lives hundreds of thousands of years, is at a human emotional developmental stage between 6 and 9 years old. They might be millions of years ahead of us in technology, and millions of years doesn't really mean anything. Once you become a singularity technology, you could be 1 year away, or you could be millions of years away. You basically have reached all of the other developments. And really here, the disparity is one in the maturation of the soul and the mind and the experience and the understanding and the expression of self. So I hope I answered your question. Feel free to direct me otherwise. But this is really what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with an ironic, counterintuitive stagnation of psychospiritual development that has bled its way into our genetics, because these beings have not only made us, they also fucked us, and they do express themselves through us as well.
You keep the scalpel sharp, man. That was fantastic. I have never heard so thoroughly explained the connection between the shortcomings that we find in our own psyches to the creation and the other that created us and their own shortcomings, and how you paired it with the pyramids. I mean, that's quite nice and fascinating. And I got some notes, but man, you just go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, hold on to your question, but I really want to ask you, because I'm saying that we talk a lot about ontological shock, right? Can you roughly remember when if you were to pick a moment of ontological shock in your life, in your childhood, which moment would you pick, for example? And I'm not asking you to detail like what it was, but just and please do if you want to, but what moment would you pick that would be the first time you experienced developmentally like an ontological shock growing up?
It's a master host, everybody. This is why I said he's a master host. I will, let's see. Trauma is trauma, big and small. Early on, doing something wrong and pissing off your parents. Early on, having a crush on a girl and them shitting all over you in front of everybody.
That's a good one. Both are really good ones. By the way, the first one you gave,
yes,
has to do with the development of narcissism.
Tell me.
Well, I mean, narcissism is a very counterintuitive etiology. The development of this thing is wild. And in order to really understand it, you really need to understand the development of the ego. And by that I mean, we generally, myself included, we assume that we're born and we figure out, how to exist in the natural world. We figure out how to like move our mouths, move our limbs, learn language. And then as we grow up and bump up against other assholes, we figure out who we are in relation to the world. But the truth is actually the opposite. The truth is we're all born psychotic, and there's no distinction between the inner world and the outer world. And the more deeply you think about this, the more it actually makes sense. But in terms of your sensory perception, there is no outer world, even for you and I, because all the information about the outer world is coming in and being relayed, through our body and then perceived as one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in our dashboard, we have to distinguish between the interoception of I need a pee, my bladder is full, and that's a red light. And then I don't know what you would call it, the meta interior exterioception of like somebody else's psychology, right? That person has it out for me. And all personality disorders in the cluster B section, no matter how smart they are, no matter their IQ, they struggle with theory of mind. They struggle with accurately mapping what is actually going on in somebody else's head. The interesting exception is that where they're trying to map the psyche of another narcissist when they're a narcissist, they're actually superior to everybody else. So Donald Trump, of course, probably does have a deeper insight, right, into the other narcissists running the world. But generally speaking, even just for understanding normal people, they struggle. And the reason for this is that we developmentally do not understand that there is an outer world. Because when we're hungry, a bottle or a boob gets shoved into our mouths, and we assume that there's a causality between our hunger and the response of the other world. And it takes frustration for us to even to begin to have the idea that maybe the other world is not an extension of our will. And it is an understanding through the experience of frustration, and ideally frustration that does not traumatize, that we begin to develop a boundary where we end and the rest of the world begins. And that is known as an ego boundary. And where people have false or permeable or not strengthened enough ego boundaries, you have a personality disorder. And where you have a warping or a confusion, a conflation between the inner world and the outer world, you have psychosis. In other words, there's no way to have an accurate perception of the outer world if you have a warped understanding of your inner world. And in the development of narcissism, you have a negation of the inner world by the caretaker. Your parents shamed you for having an emotion, and the shame is so intolerable that the child decides that's not me, and decides it is not allowed to experience or have this emotion. And then it decides it's not having that emotion. That emotion isn't real. And the splitting off and the rejection becomes a projection. onto other people. And so this is literally the development of narcissism. Their own emotions are experienced as trauma and are delusionally rejected. And the reason why I asked you about ontological shock is because a lot of us will cite the first severe traumatic ontological shock is the realization of death, of mortality. I was 5 years old and I saw a bunch of people die in movies and on TV, but I never realized, like, holy shit, people die. Like, people, like, the mother I love, the father I love, they're going to fucking die. And and I thought this shit was crazy. I was like, what is, and I interrogated my parents about, is this really happening? You're going to die. I'm going to die. Like, I lost my fucking mind. I like, at least for a good 2.5 hours, I cried. Well, guess who's not having that moment at age 5?
The Anunnaki.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
For hundreds of thousands of years,
right.
They are failing even to reach the emotional maturity that I had at age 5 to contend with the trauma of actual death. Even if our death is a deception, even if our souls get recycled, that is not how our souls are experiencing it.
Right.
So there is some real contention that is happening, real trauma that is hormetic or mithridatic or anti-fragile. So you're producing where there, if you accept my hypothesis, which is that we're being genetically regressed in a prison planet, right? Like, I have a very dark view. Even if you accept my hypothesis, there's a very ironic, extreme hyper development of the soul where they are forcing a higher evolution of the soul with every forced devolution of our genetics. The soul is pushing against something. And you have a paradox where you're, and this doesn't always happen in all cases, generally in humans. People think, you hear in the UFO community, oh, trauma is wonderful. It unlocks their psychic abilities. Trauma is great. It makes you strong. Well, not so fast. The statistical truth is that 2/3 of traumatized people are worse off for it, less resilient, more psychotic, more psychopathic, more likely to abuse. It is true that 1/3 of people who suffer trauma and abuse do end up developing resilience. But you can't just make a blanket statement and say, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. It's just not true. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Just like it is true that we put special forces soldiers through, whatever, Hell Week or whatever it is we put them through, you do have like a 60% washout rate, right? And you can't say that the special forces soldier who didn't make it through special forces training is a better special forces soldier because they didn't make it through training and they're not a special forces soldier. We tell ourselves this stupid shit when it comes to trauma. So most of the abuse that's happening is from traumatized individuals. It's not from healthy, healed, resilient individuals, right? And we tell ourselves these stories in part because it's alien psyop. In part, aliens are telling us mommy loves us because she beats us, right? But just to bring it home, the reason why I was asking you, like, what's the earliest moment of severe ontological shock? Just think how much more underdeveloped a species is that lives for hundreds of thousands of years and doesn't even reach that level of emotional wrestling, right? Like, I think everybody should take a moment and think about that for a second. What are the implications of that?
Absolutely. No, that's some deep thinking. And you bringing up the wrestling with death, I remember when I came up against that, I too interrogated and wept for hours. Like, are you guys actually going to die? Are my grandma and grandpa? Is Jim, my brother? Is this actually going to happen? Is everything that I love no longer
It seems
going
cruel.
to be? Oh my God, it
seems cruel, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely unfair, especially at that young age when you're just getting used to everything. But that you make a very interesting point that even at our young age, we have to wrestle, and the thing that I would argue we actually are is having to push up like strength training against this weight of experience. It forces an expansion and deepening of what we actually may just be at our core. Now, boy, I could just go so many different places. Great, man.
Dude, go
Thank
wherever
you.
you want, and I will talk for less and less long
No,
periods.
hey, no, go. I love it. This is, I mean,
but I wanna have a conversation with you. I wanna go back and forth. I'm just saying there's so many things that I don't just want to say without laying out the context for it, right? Without explaining my lens or my bias and perspective behind it, right? But all of this is counterintuitive, um, because
well,
we've
it's what
been
we
told
live in, right? This is, it's so familiar.
exactly, right? And it's more what we haven't been told. Like if you and I grew up and we were told, just so you know, humans, our current form of Homo sapiens sapiens, we've been around at least 200, 300,000 years, but if we were flying planes around and had internet 150,000 years ago, we would have no trace of it. So we really don't know um, whether we might have had a higher state of civilization, because the material science does not support anything lasting longer than 2 to 3,000 years. All of this is true. None of this is rarefied knowledge. Nobody is taught that in history, right? The very beginnings and understand. Nobody is taught that the majority of your history is the one that's unrecorded. Nobody is taught that 98.5% of the human condition is missing time, right? That should be the first thing you're taught in history, right?
Yes, yeah,
Right. And none of what I'm saying is an opinion. We know from material science, like our Empire State Buildings, they oxidize glass, titanium. Sorry for the background noise.
no worries.
But this is fundamental material science. Why are we not all told just the basics of archaeology? That okay, you know, open up your history book, and you know, there's always an ambulance when I start speaking basic truths that can't be argued.
Hey, give us
There's
the
always,
alert, everybody. That's right. This is important. Pay attention. Alert, alert.
but really fundamentally, and we all go around with childlike justified naivete, that assuming that if we reach just even this level of technological development 20,000 years ago, we assume that there would be remnants of this, but that's not true. If we built the Twin Towers 18,000 years ago, there would be zero trace, or maybe there would be a trace of them, but not a recognizable trace. There would be nothing in there that said, you know, who's that guy who walked between the Twin Towers? Whatever.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
You know who I'm talking about, right?
great
We
documentary.
would have no idea that some crazy French guy, you know, there might not be even a rock that we could hold in our hands, right? Of anything that we're doing right now. That needs to be the beginning. So and we assume that while we're birthed into this world, that such a fundamental question was answered by the adults around us. And all of the adults around us made the same assumption about their parents. Everybody's making the same assumption that, of course, we represent a continuous apex culminating height of civilizational development, that somehow for the first 194,000 years, we were just stupidly picking berries, hunting mammoths, jacking off, until somebody tripped over some psychedelic mushroom and started experiencing synesthesia and developed language. And we just started civilization. That's a reasonable assumption, except the fact that it's bullshit. It's not true. And if you just were given the fact about material science, there would be room to have more subversive, inquisitive thoughts about the state of the developmental state of our civilization, right? And that's really here. It's yes, we've been lied to, but it's also a bunch of truths that have just been withheld.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and our situation. Here's my core contention: the situation humanity is in, even though I absolutely assert our cognitive abilities, our intelligence have been devolved, repressed, lobotomized. Even with this level of censorship, our situation where so many people are not aware of the phenomenon cannot be explained by how stupid we are. We are not stupid enough to be missing something that is this important and this obvious. And which is why you have to talk about psychosis and delusion. So a lot of people get offended by what I'm saying, and they want to believe, and this is something that people with personality disorders do, they want to believe that I'm insulting them. But what they're actually offended over is the implication. And the implication is one of betrayal. That I'm just standing in here as, the same way that people in laboratory studies, when they gave people LSD and they were trying to figure out what LSD was, the person who handing the medication to the patient was often viewed as either Jesus or Hitler, depending on the demeanor of the person on the face who handed the medication or the person's projection taking it. You very rarely did you get like a very neutral, oh, he's just Jim, the other guy. You got that too. But generally, you didn't have many gradations between Hitler and Jesus, right? People who get offended by what I'm saying, they could just disagree with me rather than getting offended. People who are getting offended are actually reacting from a place of recognition that if what I'm saying is true, that there's a horrible betrayal and I actually can't be blamed, that maybe many humans can't be blamed. So there's just like a deep betrayal of a parent killing their children is a deep, profound spiritual and Darwinian betrayal, right, of the caretaker child relationship. The implication of our amnesia and the Occam's razor conclusion is that there is a Munchausen level of betrayal afoot because if humanity were in possession of its own knowledge and its own civilizations, we wouldn't have 98.5% missing time of our history, right? The implication, my profound insight is that my insights are not intellectually profound. They actually require delusion as the most humble explanation. That doesn't make me right, um, but 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 it does make me less arrogant than I come across.
Well, and it is dangerous in a different kind of way. Because instead of us looking at some exterior villain or exterior savior or exterior anything, it requires us to look at ourselves and go, oh shit. Is there something within us individually and as a species that we're going to have to deal with if we can actually think to deal with whatever else we might come up against as we continue on? Because we can now talk about where we are in the present tense with what's trying to be passed on to us as disclosure. But with your premise, we are woefully unprepared to handle a kind of, multi-thousand-year narcissistic individual being that could assert dominance in so many ways by the very fact that we have a piece of that busted mentality within us ourselves.
Well, I mean, keep going. How do you feel? I want to.
Well,
how are you feeling about? I have such a hard time even talking about it. I don't want to use the D word, disclosure. But how do you feel about whatever the fuck you want to call about whatever the fuck is going on right now? How do you feel about things?
I think that there is an attempt at a narrative that is being slow roll dripped out. Now, I do find it, and we had gone back and forth briefly about how if the government's been in control of disclosure this whole time, why were they trying to F with us and tell us we were crazy when it was first starting to bubble up in the consciousness post-World War II with Blue Book et al. But at this moment in time, it seems like there are various factions Earthside that are vying for control of a narrative, and this is an attempt at shaping a particular narrative. To what short-sighted ends, I don't know. And I'll be honest, like you had said earlier about others within the community, I don't really care. What I am primarily concerned with, and what I would be interested in continuing to discuss with you, is if what we are dealing with is a shattered kind of ego, then what do we as individuals need to do in order to face what has always been both a part of us and the beings that will present themselves as superior, even though they are not, for the very fact that we've been forced to experience so much more than they ever could by way of our imposed limitations. It's almost like when you finally confront an individual that yells and screams and commands that you follow their way, and you look at them, and all of a sudden all you see is a whiny, crying baby. It's like, oh, you're just kind of busted inside, and you're just wagging your rattle, asking for more cereal, or else you're going to hold your breath. What are you going to do? Like, what? You've cracked open my mind quite a bit here with all of this.
I'm happy to hear that, man, because that is what disclosure is supposed to be. The disclosure is supposed to actually make you have new thoughts, right? Like many, I think a lot of people ask really good rhetorical questions, and they make almost zero effort to actually take the thought experiment of their own question seriously. They don't actually go there. They ask the question, but their own mind is censoring even going there. And the human mind should be trying to answer these things. So, for instance, when people say, why now? Very rarely do I actually hear the gears turning in somebody's heads to try to answer the question, right? And I think it's important, rather than saying, oh, I'm asking the question because the government isn't telling me, so I'm just waiting for the government to tell me why now, answer that, to say, like, wait a second, you have some of the smartest people in the world who could have gone into another field, made a lot of money, or had a lot more status, who are actually trying to answer the question, even though what they have is mostly an absence of information or presence of disinformation. Why aren't you trying to answer the question? A lot of people who are even experiencers, or a lot of people who even know that the phenomenon is real, might ask the question rhetorically and have never actually tried to answer why now. So I'm personally very frustrated because I think, look, the implication here, where a narcissist uses a lot of what's called limbic hijacking, meaning they try to rile up your emotions to deflect you from reality so you don't figure out the truth, right? So if you're going down a very logically deterministic path that would result in exposure of, like, their infidelity or something, they will often change the subject and try to trigger you and pull whatever dirty tricks they need to, because they don't want you actually thinking about reality. So narcissism is a defense against reality. And the phenomenon, when we say, oh, it's all about consciousness, and there isn't, I don't think at all that there's just a negative aspect to the phenomenon. But if you really think about the game theoretical options on the table, there is an option for a phenomenon that is benevolent and intransparent, but then it must be intransparent for a reason. Because if it wants good things and it can't afford to walk through the front door, then it doesn't have enough supremacy of power to walk through the front door. We're talking about a benevolent James Bond, a benevolent CIA. But that's a possibility. There's a possibility of a phenomenon that is wildly powerful, that can afford to walk through the front door, that is also benevolent, but then there's no excuse for it being non-transparent. And then there's a possibility for a phenomenon that is very powerful, is non-transparent, but then there's no reason for it to not be benevolent. In other words, where we are assuming or acknowledging the existence of a higher intelligence and its selective or opaque communication, right? Wiping memories,
Right, yeah, often through deception, yeah.
this through deception. If we also then say that it is technological or has a power supremacy, which, by the way, if you're able to telepathically communicate an idea and emotion, that's a check. That's a yes.
That's a yes.
Every man on this planet, and I mean man, every Y chromosomal Homo sapien species would love the ability to just project a feeling or an idea into a woman's mind. All right. This counts as technological supremacy. You cannot argue that these things are technologically superior and non-transparent, but they just lack the EQ. They just don't know how to communicate their feelings because they have fucking telepathy. All right. So even if these things are at a narcissistic level, it's not like they just don't know how to convey their ideas. This is not a failure to communicate. This is a decision to not communicate transparently and publicly. And so, you know, if you look at this, the phenomenon is choosing the technology of the mind, the technology of the human mind for political and psychological and technological leverage. The phenomenon, much like a narcissist, when they're choosing to manipulate your emotions to take you off of a path of reason, the phenomenon is weaponizing the ambiguity, the equivocal nature of the phenomenon itself, so that humanity is pitted against itself. And here we just described ufology. Ufology is a bunch of people who've been ostracized by society and money and the scientific community that are fighting with each other. And disclosure looks like it's culminating into an orgasm of inconclusiveness, right? Where theoretically maybe you came, but you're still really not happy and you don't know where you are in the relationship. This is the climax that we're headed to. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, that is hilarious and resonates. That absolutely feel, because yeah, there's a lot of, it's not this way, it's that way. How could you think that? I disagree with you, and now I have personal anger against you. And let's talk about the people, not the data. Yeah, yes.
And the relationship status still remains inconclusive, right? And even if she says we're together, we're married,
but where are you going on Friday night? Right. Yes. Right.
Yes. Or she's turning off her location or whatever. This is our relationship with the government right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And why? And this relationship that we have with, I'm sorry, you can call it disclosure. I'm going to call it confirmation. This relationship we have with, you know, Schrodinger's confirmation or phantom confirmation, right? The impending one that we're all expecting. This relationship that we ascribe to being a relationship between us and the government is actually the relationship that humanity has with the phenomenon. So we first, just like we made a baseline assumption about, you know, previous potentially advanced civilizations or the persistence of certain materials, or an assumption about technological advancement, that the greater it is, the more we'd see signs of it, when really the opposite is true, right? Like nobody's seeing your songs that are playing on your iPhone, right? But you know, before, when they were on DVD or
radio,
vinyl,
you could all tune in. Yes, yes,
you could all tune in. But I mean the physical remnant of it, right? Like if you can carry your music in your pocket, you know, it might be on the hard drive, but once you put it in the cloud, like the more advanced you get, generally speaking, the less persistent the medium is of that advancement, the less signs that you have of it, which is also the nature of the phenomenon, by the way, right? Like the the most frustrating part of the phenomenon is going to be the archons. It's not going to be the grays and the alien bodies. It's going to be the NHI of the phenomenon that are closer to discarnate angels and demons that might be able to pop in and out of your existence, of my existence, and just fuck with our emotions for 3 to 4 minutes, right? It's not going to be the abductions and the rape and, you know, the hybrid baby you're having in the first trimester. That's right. Like the more physical aspects of the phenomenon are the more accountable ones. The most devastating ones are where the design is invisible. And so our assumptions are wrong, and they're stupid because they're delusional. They're not stupid because we lack the intellectual capacity to philosophically penetrate the phenomenon. Our intellectual capacities to rightly focus on the phenomenon are being hijacked by the phenomenon. And you can hear it in this conversation about disclosure. Either there's roughly like a 4-grid quadrant here, all right, or 4-quadrant grid here. Either you're working under the assumption that there is another intelligence here, or you're working under the presumption that there isn't.
Mhm.
All right, when it comes to an expected announcement. All right, and this is independent of whether you think the announcement is true or isn't, whether we're going to be lied to or not. You're either in agreement that there's likely something here or there likely isn't. And for the people who think that there likely isn't something here, the mental gymnastics just become crazier and crazier, right? So the people who are most expecting some sort of alien ship Project Bluebeam that are real UFOs, just not really made by aliens, like human made UFOs that are going to be beaming people up, that are going to be spoofing an alien invasion. Somehow we developed this alien technology without the aliens, and Trump is going to like roll it out. So we're going to have everything about Independence Day without the actual aliens. It's all going to be done by people, and we're just going to fake it, right? But the people who are balls deep in ufology research, the people who are actually being abducted and raped by aliens, their expectation for disclosure is way more conservative. How do you explain that? How do you explain that? I would even love for the PSYOP Project Bluebeam to happen. All right. That would at least prove that we have the tech.
Right.
All right. I would love to be lied. I don't even think we're going to be lied to with the flair and the drama that I want. Most people who haven't completely lost their minds in ufology are fearing a limited hangout. They're fearing catastrophic soft disclosure,
Mhm.
or the term that I have coined, limp dick disclosure. All right. That's your fear. That's my fear. We're like, Trump is going to say, good evening, my fellow Americans. We're not alone. God bless the world. God bless America. Fuck you. Goodbye. Leave me alone. Don't ask me any questions. Right. I just stole, by the way, I might get arrested. I stole the speech from the White House. That is basically the verbatim speech that we're going to get.
I have it in my desk. I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting to use it.
That's really good. Yeah. Yeah. He has 69 different versions of fuck you. I'm not telling you anything. Right.
Maybe he'll
Prepared.
do a haiku. I don't know.
That's really, have you done stand up before? That's a really good Trump voice.
One day, who knows? But
Maybe I'll do a haiku. Roses are red, Nordics
Nordics are blue.
Nordics are blue. They engineered you. Joke's on you. Disclosure is true. Yeah. I mean, so I'm frustrated because I feel the alien hijacking is in our faces because we can't even talk about this rationally. We should not be assuming that if there is another intelligence here, that it isn't influencing the very unfolding of confirmation, right? There's no way in this 4-grid possibilities. Either you believe they're here or they're not. So if you believe they're not here, okay, then what is President Trump going to disclose? Is he going to disclose that that the U.S. government just invented a psyop, where it had a double psyop, where it had committees that were saying, no, there's nothing to see here, because there really wasn't anything to see here. And they made it seem like there was something to see here, to have committees to give a small subsection of the population the conviction that there is aliens when there isn't. So then Trump is just disclosing non-disclosure. That's possibility one. Or there's no intelligences here, and the PSYOP is just going to continue. By the way, the PSYOP was refusing to reveal something that doesn't exist. So now, for 80 years ago, we plan to have this moment now where Trump is going to say, yes, aliens are real. Those are the two quadrants where you think intelligence isn't here. And you'll notice those two quadrants require a ton of mental gymnastics. All right. Maybe that'll happen. There's a non-zero possibility, but it doesn't sound or feel or look like Occam's razor. The other one, there is another intelligence here. And Trump is either going to say, what? I mean, I guess the options are Trump either says, all right, it's not real. We lied to you. We had this advanced technology, but we made it seem like it was aliens for the sake of national security. Right.
Right.
Or he says, somewhere on the spectrum, yeah, there's another intelligence here. So you have those 4 quadrants where there really is another intelligence here, and you sort of tell the truth about it, or you lie about it, or there isn't an intelligence here, and you sort of tell the truth about it, or you lie about it. And the only one that doesn't sound absolutely fucking bullshit crazy is the one where the government finally says, yeah, something else is here. But even in that one, you realize you have a problem, which is you either say, yes, there's a cover up and we've been lying to you, or you do a version of the continued cover up, which is you say, yeah, it is true there's been things that we haven't really been able to understand. And now we're going to be transparent and we're going to reveal to you the things that we haven't been able to understand. So we're still learning. There is something else here. And unfortunately, I think that's the most likely thing that's happening. Um, it's pretty obvious, but yeah, I think confirmation is going to be a limited hangout where you disclose 1% so you can continue covering up the other 99%. But that is also the least fantastical projection, right? Like, I admit that my conjectures, what I believe, my theories, they are deeply subversive to even the status quo in ufology. And I don't have a narcissistic expectation that people accept what I say or believe any. I think you should do your research. You should ask me. You should poke holes in it. However, my expectation, my predictions for confirmation or disclosure are among the most conservative, right? And I think that's really important for people to think about, that, you know, your ability to predict reality is probably one of the best measures you have for whether or not you're perceiving reality correctly. It's not the only one. Everybody can be duped, but the people right now who have the most likely accurate prediction when it comes to disclosure are going to be the people who have the most conservative expectations for whatever is being revealed. And those, ironically, are going to be the people who are most balls deep in the phenomenon, but also haven't been hijacked, have had their minds completely hijacked by aliens. And we're in a really fucking crazy place in history. I don't know about you, Douglas, but when I would read things about the Enlightenment period, or where they burned, what is the name, Giordano Bruno, or you had Galileo and the Vatican Church, I was wondering what must it be like to watch all these fucking stupid idiots lose their mind over the realization, that the Earth is orbiting the sun, or that there's a material nature to other planets, that they're not just all orbs of light, that there's a physical materiality to shit outside of Earth. It's almost the same thing, right? Like the idea that angels and demons might actually be physical. By the way, that is what Christians are freaking out of. Not all Christians, but some Christians. Somehow they worry that their faith or scripture is threatened if they realize that their own scripture is telling them that the angels and demons can be physically real. Is it really that different to the Vatican freaking out that when you look through a telescope, it's saying, oh, there might be some physical structures on the moon? Right? Like, do you realize what the Archbishop was telling Galileo when he looked through the telescope? Do you know what the words were he said to Galileo?
What did he say?
It's going to sound just like these fucking fake skeptics, these wannabe skeptics, debunkers like Mick West, right? Mick West wants you to believe that ufology is a religion where people jerk themselves off to aliens and think like aliens are real. They want to be skeptics, want you to believe that ufology is an alien cult religion. But it was the Vatican's archbishop that wanted Galileo to believe that what he was seeing through the lenses of his own telescope were projections of the mind.
Wow.
Yeah. It turns out that it's religious authorities that want you to believe that reality is just a projection of the mind and is a religious infatuation, just like the fucking Arrow report. These are not scientifically minded people. This is a religious argument to argue that something is a projection of the
That's
mind.
a control argument. That is a
Yes,
mental control argument.
it's a mental control argument, just like the Arrow report. So we're not even really having the non-hijacked conversation. We need to start having the non-hijacked conversation over, what is skepticism, right? Skepticism is when the data is suggesting that your map is not corresponding to the territory, right? So if you have a UFO in the sky and the sensors are saying, hey, that's kind of violating our basic understanding of traditional aerodynamics, traditional propulsion, how are these things, are we going to tell ourselves that the sensors on the F-35s are hallucinating? Did somebody give too much LSD to the sensors?
Too much high dose, man. Put me down, man.
Right? But so we're not even having the rational conversation. And I wish we were, but you follow. So what I would like to aspirationally hope that I'm bringing to psychology, to ufology, is psychological rigor. I hope that I'm helping people realize that the conversation, and I don't really care about the personalities and the who's who. I really don't care about the opinions, but I do care about the utility of intelligence in the mind, even though ours, I believe, has been regressed. We have some of the most brilliant people who aren't even having the most dangerous conversation, and some of these things are really obvious. The fact that this phenomenon is here has delivered enough empirical evidence to know that something else is going on, that there is a material nature to this, that there's absolutely a psychological nature to this, and that there's absolutely a definitive nature, a definitive empirical reality to the manipulation of human psychology that is being perpetrated by the phenomenon, is undeniable, because we're dealing with abductees who have physical remnants of abductions, including implants, and also undeniable memory loss where they can't recount it. And in psychology, what do we call it when you can't remember something due to trauma? We call it dissociation. But dissociation is just a catch-all term for delusion. Like, we've trained other people to actually believe. Like, of course, if I asked you, where were you February 3rd, 1988, and what were you eating for breakfast? I'm not going to call you delusional if you can't remember.
It was a cereal.
It was a cereal, right? But you're still making an educated guess.
Yes.
You're not actually. But tomorrow, if I spoke with you and you didn't remember interviewing me for this podcast at all, and you weren't bothered by the fact that you couldn't remember it and you felt like it was normal, we should be calling that delusion, because it falls within the realm with the ability of somebody who doesn't have, dementia to remember. But we've called it dissociation because even within the field of psychology itself, we have a mass psychosis in the field where we won't accurately diagnose and label actual delusion and actual psychoticism. So we've created a catch-all term, and I'm not arguing this this is my conjecture, but this is not hermeneutic. This is not my interpretation. Feel free right now to pull up a browser and look for the clinical psychiatric definition of dissociation. And you're going to find it's a rat's nest. It's a basket case where they're shoving in 7 different definitions, including depersonalization, derealization. What is derealization? Losing contact with reality. But you don't want to call it psychosis when the literal definition of psychosis is losing contact with reality. So we have literal phenomena of psychosis, things that are on the psychotic spectrum, things that are definitively, at the very least, pseudopsychotic. But notice you're looking up the definition of dissociation when really your first impulse should be, wait a second. If I lost access to yesterday's reality in this hypothetical, right? If I said, hey, if you can't remember that we even had this conversation 24 hours ago, of course you would call that psychosis, because it's a failure to remember reality. It's a failure to accurately apprehend reality. And we've convinced ourselves that there are ways in which we can fail to grasp reality and not call it psychotic. The entire ufology phenomenon of 8 billion people, generally speaking, missing reality is a phenomenon of psychosis.
Could you call that phenomenon exteriorly induced, or is that something that has been entrained?
What a really good question. But they are the same thing, right?
Yeah.
if something manipulates our genetics, so that we're born, so that we're more susceptible to archonic hijacking, or even just more crudely socially engineered hijacking, meaning, if you abuse a child enough, you'll produce a personality disorder in them. You'll produce a dysfunction, an inability to function in society, and you'll produce an abuser. At least in the majority of cases, that's externally imposed, right? Like physical and emotional abuse. You're talking about the environment doing it. Whether you're hijacking a caretaker as a demon and abusing that child, or whether you are literally a physical Anuna and subjecting the seeds of civilizations every time you wipe the earth clean and start back again from feudalism, and you're imposing torture and abuse and a coercive control of the mind. I mean, whether it happens pseudo internally through genetics that make it more easily to rule the mind in such a way, or you're literally physically the alien that is holding the whip and is lashing the person,
Mm-hmm.
it's still exogenous, right? It's still alien. It's still not the natural development that would happen. And this is such a good point. Okay. If you take, we like to look at where we are in the world, and we like to say humans are all fucked up. We're doing this to ourselves. And in the same breath, we say, why can't we all just care about each other's welfare? And then we go and we vilify technological development, we vilify money, and we say money and technology corrupts everything. Meanwhile, we're getting literally abducted by beings with an asymmetric technology that are telling us that, with their own technology that they use for the for the telepathic hijacking, they use this technology to tell us that humanity is on a bad trajectory and is facing moral corruption due to too much technological advancement, while they're using this technology to brainwash us and tell us this. And then they use that technology to wipe our memories from whatever they don't want us to remember in the abductions. And then we get back here, and then we come into a UFO space, and we're like, maybe they should wipe us all out because we're all horrible to each other. What the fuck is happening? And it turns out there's a term for this, and it's called betrayal trauma. The same person, Jennifer Freed, who coined the term DARVO that you have in abusive victim-abuser dynamics. Give me a second here. What does DARVO stand for?
I'll look it up here.
Thank you. And meanwhile, I will struggle with my dying hijack brain. A reverse victim offender. It's either deflect or deny. It's
deny, attack, reverse victim and offender.
Yeah, and you'll see this happen all over in frustrating conversations, fights, in high conflict personalities, and you'll see it happen almost every day in UFO spaces, where the person who's actually lying and performing the deception will attack somebody else while claiming to be a victim, reverse the victim offender role. And this is the classic, narcissistic abuser who is telling you that they were abused by a narcissist in a relationship.
This is fascinating because this happens at the personal level. It happens in the group dynamic level. It happens in families. It happens in companies. It happens in governments. It seems to happen in certain authoritarian structures. It seems to happen all the way up. I mean, this definitely. So if we, though, I mean, here we are, we're having a very dangerous conversation looking at the actual basis of how our minds make up engaging not only with ourselves and each other and the environment, our sense of time and how we can handle it. But if we can have, and we are having this conversation, if we're able to have this conversation, that's got to mean that we can grow past the DARVO, that we can get beyond it somehow.
I mean, that's a really good point. It sort of links to what you're saying about is it being imposed from the outside or is it coming from the inside? Obviously, it's however you look at it, it is imposed. So it is at least in a very broad sense, it's alien. Meaning,
Not
I mean, okay, let's
not
take a look at,
organically natural. Right.
yeah, I mean, let's take a look at abuse from a psychological perspective, with or without aliens, right? What people don't understand about abuse, like these are some, everybody recognizes and can describe abuse when they see it, but almost nobody can really explain the ego, what is it called, the developmental drive for abuse. So what is it that an abuser is after, and and what is the psychodynamics behind abuse are what is known as alloplastic defense. So alloplastic defense, and it has directly to do with everything we talked about, in terms of emotions, regulating emotions, accepting emotions within yourself, and quote unquote existentially needing for other people to support that they themselves have a certain view or emotion. So where reality is bumping up against the invented identity that the abuser has, what's known as a narcissist, an externalized false self. In other words, there's an identity that they've projected into the outside world of how, not just how they sell themselves to other people, because that's what identity is, but the narcissist has crossing of wires, a conflation. But in other words, like, you know, you're a podcaster, I'm a Spaces host, sure, I'm black, I'm from Germany, I'm an American. These are all identities. I personally don't give a fuck about them. But you and I understand that one is more performatively serving a function for how other people can sort of label you or put you in a box, versus how you're really feeling about yourself, right?
Certainly.
And some people internalize their identity as their actual experience of self. So I certainly don't go around saying, like, you know, I'm a Spaces host, I'm an African American. It's not part of my personal experience self. But if I'm filling out a social security form, sure, I'm going to check black, right? That's sort of the distinction between identity and experience, capital S self. Now, the narcissist doesn't know a difference. The narcissist actually believes that the more progress they can make on their externalized identity, the more their actual real self becomes that. So you have a conflation where the narcissist has literally lost the locality of self. They don't know where they are. And I mean that in a very literal psychodynamic sense. It's so bad that when you attack the narcissist's externalized false self, it is way worse than actually attacking the truth about what they're feeling. I'm going to say that again. We all have experienced loud, grandiose narcissists who, like to believe they're a certain something. If you attack that fake version, that persona, that's worse for the narcissist than actually, yes, because the delusion is existentially more important to them than reality, because they're stuck at a developmental stage.
Right, that's all they've been working on. Well, that's all
Yes,
they know to work on. Oh.
well, I mean this in a very developmental sense. So when we ask ourselves, why is it that when those studies where they took a baby and they put like a bottle of formula inside some wiry bear holding the bottle versus something else that was also inanimate, but it was warm and fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's known as limbic resonance. This idea that it's not just an idea. The reality is that there's many physical processes in the human body that don't have a physical hard set point in your DNA, including your body temperature. So your body temperature is not hard coded in your DNA, nor is your blood pressure, nor is your heart rate. All of these need to be limbically calibrated through the proximity and through the limbic resonance of the caretaker. They need skin to skin touch. And we have DNA coding, epigenetic and genetic, that says to the human body, when you're born, your body temperature is going to calibrate to the caretaker
To the environment,
and to the environment. And so for the being's own survival, it is existentially more important for the child to get the calibration so that it can regulate fundamental things like body temperature, because a baby can survive actually several days without food, but it cannot survive several days if it can't regulate its own body temperature, its own blood pressure, its own heart rate. It needs that calibration. And the problem is we don't respect the fundamental needs. And I mean that in the definition of the term, not in the way that most people understand it. We don't respect the fundamental needs of psychological architecture for the developing self the way we do the fundamental needs of oxygen for glycolysis or for ATP production. But they are the same. In other words, in order for the mind and the ego to develop, and I mean ego in the healthy developmental sense, there are needs. And some of these needs are the validation of the inner world. In other words, if your parents tell you that anger is an unacceptable emotion, they will, to a certain extent, to a certain dimension, produce delusion in you because they're rejecting your inner world, and your inner world isn't receiving that calibration that anger or righteous anger is an acceptable emotion to even have. And if an emotion isn't even acceptable to have, and we're not talking about expressing it, right? Like there's
just
a difference.
having it, right?
Just having it. Like I can have the emotion where I really want to fucking kill you. That's totally ethical as long as I don't fucking do it. It's totally ethical.
Yes.
But if we're taught as a child that we're not loved if we have the emotion, then there's a real problem, because if you cannot have the emotion, then you really don't identify it when you have it. And if you don't identify it when you have it, then you definitely can't fucking regulate it. And what is happening in abusers is an insistence and a existential need for the other person, alloplastic, meaning other, for the other person to regulate their emotions. People don't realize this, but what do you hear the number one saying that the abuser says? Let's take a severe example like domestic abuse. What do they say? He made me do it. She made me do it. It is a developmental need because they have not reached the developmental stage where they're able to emotionally regulate.
Okay. I have to take this and then
I want
to lay it over the creators and us. Do they need us to regulate them? And in that abusive relationship, they are trying to calibrate and dominate all at once so that we can then help them thrive, subsist, exist, and further on. Is that actually what they, at least on one level, built? And could you then extend that to the kind of trauma that people experience when they are abducted?
You're asking me, wait, say that last part again. I have the beginning part. Do they need us to regulate them? But what were you connecting to?
Could you extend the trauma inducement that people continuously go through in their many different expressions during abductions?
Yeah, you absolutely could. And remind me of the second part, the last part of the question, in case I don't get to it. But just make sure I don't leave it out, because that's an interesting point.
Well, if it comes back to me, I'll remember. You go. You go.
Okay, well, what do you call, at least in biology, what do you call the species relationship where one species is dependent on another one for its own existential needs?
Is that parasitic?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, explain to me how the psychological dynamic of a loosh farm is any different from narcissistic supply.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The reason why you have the narcissistic supply relationship expressed in the Old Testament, in the Upanishads, in the Rig Vedas, in the Sumerian tablets, 20 to 40,000 tablets, is because the human, quote unquote, narcissistic relationship is one of parasitism, where somebody's ego developmental regressed or regressiveness, right? You look, and this is clinically true. The only difference between pathological narcissism and primary narcissism, which is you're just at the appropriate age as you're moving through the narcissistic stages, is that pathological narcissism means you didn't move through the narcissistic stage. So somebody who has NPD really is just somebody who is still 6 to 9 years old. Okay. And so they are still developmentally dependent on paralogical, meaning delusional relationships, because the structure, the psychological architecture of the ego has not developed yet in such a way that they can have an accurate relationship with the external world. In other words, they cannot acknowledge yet the reality of other people being independent people, of other people being real, in other words, they haven't broken out of solipsism, right? And and solipsism is a condition where you believe you're God, right? Where you believe the external world is just reacting, like the classical, portrayal of narcissism is the 6-year-old kid riding in a car saying, "Mommy, mommy, the moon is following me." And a child has only grown through a narcissistic stage if they can survive and graduate from the dialectic where the father or the mother says, let's think about that. Let's take a look at that car coming in the other direction on the highway. There's a kid in there too. Is the moon following that kid? They're going in the opposite direction. And only where the child says, wait a second, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Something else is going on here. Because the moon can't be following all of us, right? So maybe there's some sort of optical deception going on. Maybe I need to understand what's going on.
Let's stay up late and watch the moon and see if it keeps following you. If you stop, does it stop? Right, yeah, there are lots of ways, yeah.
But the narcissistic kid, and this doesn't mean pathological if it's age appropriate, but a kid has not graduated from narcissism as long as he says, no, the moon is only following me. And most kids, all kids in the narcissistic stage will say, no, the moon is only following me. It's not following the other one, which isn't not enough people think about, because here we have some kid who actually believes that there is a planetary cosmic body that is moving in accordance to a vehicle of a family going down a highway, right?
Specifically for him, right?
For him. We understand that is narcissism when we're talking about a 6-year-old, but for some reason, the entire field of psychotherapy, save for a few very rare experts with, just like in psychedelics and advanced propulsion, they're either dead or octogenarians and they're about to die. Save for the very few experts who really understand what's going on in narcissism, the entire psychological field is suffering a hijacked delusion, because when I explain to you the scenario of a moon synchronizing its orbital motions in accordance to, a Volkswagen family station wagon going down a highway and a 6-year-old kid, you recognize that as delusional. But when that 6-year-old kid is in a 42-year-old male body, all of a sudden psychology doesn't want to call it a delusion anymore, because psychology is fucking hijacked. Which is why you have terms, just like in ufology, we have terms like unidentified anomalous phenomenon instead of UFO, or instead of flying fucking object that's defying our physics. That would be way more honest, right? Unidentified anomalous phenomena is a term that's much more appropriate for the female orgasm, not for something that is violating our fundamental understanding of physics.
True.
Right?
Yes, all true.
Right. And before I get labeled a misogynist, I'm not saying that there isn't a female orgasm. I'm just saying it's way harder to understand than over unity physics. And which is also true, by the way, because we have multiple times cracked advanced propulsion physics, the scientists have died over and over. So far, we do not have somebody who can replicably produce, an exact count of the female orgasm. So I'm still just citing scientific facts here. They just happen to be chosen to be interpreted as offensive to some people, right? So please don't get rid of the term UAP. Just apply it to the very fascinating and intrasexual, evolutionary dynamics of the female psyche. And let's just be honest when it comes to UFOs, right? Like, and so when you're asking, like, yes, do they need us? Yeah, we're dealing with the parasitism, and here's how here's how it's not an interpretation. Here's how it's not even Occam's razor. Here's how it's logical deduction. You're dealing with parasitism because there wouldn't be a need to warp our perception, our understanding of psychology. There wouldn't be a need to fuck with our perception and our memories. Like, telepathic communication would be fine, but there wouldn't be a need to manipulate and have a disparity between the apparent appearance of reality and the measurable, objective, observable, or provable, or remnant, right? Most of what we have is vestigial, like whatever is left over from an abduction. You wouldn't have this huge delta between perception and the ability to empirically prove what you experienced if the phenomenon could afford to be transparent, to walk through the door. The only argument available on the table for lessening our consciousness is that we're dealing, at least to a large degree, at least for a lot of the NHI, with the species whose fundamental ecological coexistence with us, I say coexistence in quotation marks, whose fundamental relationship to us is parasitic by definition, where our consciousness is being lessened by a species that is selectively communicating with us. It is telling you this. It is literally, think about, it is even telling you this in the counterintelligence. When a species is telling you, oh, you shouldn't have these nukes because nukes are going to morally corrupt you. You're too technologized. It is literally telling you, it wants you to get rid of the tools that allow you to interrogate reality, right? Ironically, using those tools to perform this manipulation. But let's be honest. What's the easiest way to get rid of nukes? Give us ZPE. Like, everybody gets rid of their nuclear reactors, and then we can fly around with right? If you're so concerned about the environment, just give us the clean energy that isn't polluting the environment, right?
Yeah.
That's an obvious thing. So yeah, the phenomenon is telling you, even literally, it's telling you in the Bible, it's bad if you understand the difference between good and evil. In Genesis, it's telling you in abductions, we don't want you having all this technology. It's no different from a Munchausen parent that is telling you shouldn't learn how to read and write because books are going to corrupt your mind and they're satanic and they're demonic. It's literally evinced in the behavior, and of course that doesn't mean all of the phenomenon is negative. But when you ask, is this thing somehow needing us? The reason why there's some sort of parasitic host relationship is because the only reason a parasite can dominate even over apex predators is through deception, right? Like, parasitism relies on mimicry, on blending in, on pretending to be something that it isn't. And the problem is, just like in psychology, we don't recognize narcissism as the delusion for what it is. We don't recognize selective amnesia as delusion, and we call it dissociation. We don't even recognize parasitism as predation. And we should be, right? We're dealing with a predator whose mode of predation is parasitism. So sorry, that's let me know if I answered your question here, but the phenomenon is telling us it is parasitic.
Well, no, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you. And elucidating and striking. And hey, this is the conversation. Because then the question is, how does one individually and species wide deal with a parasite?
Well, if you let's take it very literally. Like, what are most people's experiences when they take some sort of deworming, and they, I don't know,
You
I
got
don't
to
know if
poop it out. You got
you
to
got to
poop
poop
it
it
out.
out, but the resultant ontological shock is often one of disgust and shock, right?
Certainly, yes, yes, that's right. You do go through a process of realization, like, oh my God, my very behavior was being manipulated by this
Yeah,
thing.
and I think this ontological shock, look, it's on our faces. It's in the term, right? I don't speak Greek, but there's two words that are forming up apocalypse, apocalypsis. Somebody with a Greek accent needs to take those words apart, but it means uncovering, unveiling.
Unveiling,
So
right?
apocalypse means disclosure. And so there's a reason why, and there's a part of the calypsis part um, that is etymologically linked. Of course, apocalypse is etymologically linked to end of the world, destruction via the Bible. But there's even a part of the calypsis part, the K part in the Greek spelling, that is linked to hell and the definition of hell and the understanding of hell. And we have to ask ourselves, why is the term for disclosure and unveiling or revelation synonymous with end of the world cycles? And that is because the deepest disgust and ontological shock is a level of betrayal, something that is not you, that is living inside you, that is governing, like you said, your behavior and betraying your own interests.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have to do is counterintuitively move toward an investigation of the truth, even where it makes us sick. Because a lot of people's relationship to the field and the investigation of ufology is unfortunately a little bit religious in the sense that they're looking for the worldview that gives them the most resilience that they can stomach, and they're not really pursuing truth at all cost, even if it's a really uncomfortable truth, right? So some people have a relationship to their religion where they really care about maintaining their faith, and it's not so much about the truth or the reality of their God. It's much more about the maintenance of the psychological structure that allows them to be a good, resilient, and functioning individual. Some people have a relationship to their religion where they really care, and they want to establish and concretize the reality of the being that they believe in. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, are you here to support the version of truth that is a psychological structure for you? Or do you realize that psychological comfort, when it comes to subversive truths, is actually diametrically opposed, is actually antithetical to the truth? That either you're for the truth or you're for psychological safety. But if you're pursuing subversive truth, you can't have it both ways.
Medicine's going to make you feel worse before you feel better. Yeah.
Before you feel better. Yeah. And in fact, this is what separates personality disorder treatments from the other 85% of the DSM. The treatment of the patient in successful treatment of people with personality disorders is that they actually become suicidal and you actually risk real suicide. The person becomes worse as you regress them back into the childhood stages. They become more emotionally labile as they're contending with the emotions that they repressed and split off from their personality. It is a traumatizing, some might even say a shamanistic
Hmm.
re-encountering of death, right? So if you really want disclosure, I'm not saying look for the deep, dark doom and that whatever is terrifying is the truth, but you cannot be looking for the truth that is psychologically comfortable. Either you're looking for the truth, and the truth either is or it isn't psychologically comfortable. But I'll tell you what is the most ubiquitous, the most harmful, most parasitic and self-sabotaging delusion you hear coming out of so many people's mouths. Are we ready for disclosure?
Hmm.
Hijack. You hear a person saying, "Are we ready?" So what? Nobody asked Anne Frank whether she was ready for the gas chambers. We don't do this when we drop a nuke, but somehow when we're dealing with the horrible weapons of ontological and epistemological truth, we then put another barrier and say, can the person handle the truth? When really truth is asymmetric and delusion isn't. Everybody does have the ability to choose and say, I'm going to ignore reality, I'm going to reject it. I'm going to start digging the graves of my own delusion. So if people are presented with the truth, they always have the option to reject it and become delusional. But people who care about the truth and don't have the information presented don't even have the option to encounter the truth. So the truth is asymmetric, and we should not be asking whether we can handle the truth. Ontological shock, traumatic ontological shock from the truth is the best case scenario here. Because the worst case scenario is that we are not informed of the giant car bomb of a pole shift. We're not informed of the fire in the building. We don't smell the smoke. And the betrayal is facilitated by our amnesia, by the very fact that we think it's a good thing, that the very idea that we think that we can avoid truth by not knowing it is a delusional idea, right? Like the trauma that befell Anne Frank is no less traumatic. It's not like if Anne Frank didn't know that she was going to be sent to the gas chambers, that somehow her not knowing about it would have not put her on the train. And this is what we actually tell ourselves in ufology, that if we don't know the truth, that somehow we can protect ourselves from the truth. It is actual delusion happening when we ask this question. It is a sign of alien hijacking. And we actually need to realize there's a silver lining in the opposite direction. There's a silver lining in the ontological shock, just like that silver lining for you and me when we had the horrible experience of contending with actual mortality. We had a development of our ego that is far eclipsing beings that have a technological edge over humanity by hundreds of thousands, if not millions or billions of years, where we have a development of our own ego development that is far asymmetric to theirs in our favor, that the more humanity can lean into ontological shock, the more we can do the irreverent thing and say the truth or present the evidence that absolutely psychologically traumatizes people, that counterintuitively, against all of your genetics and all of your social, genetic, cultural, religious engineering against the truth, that this is actually one of the most morally virtuous things that you can actually do. Not force people to hear the truth, but allow people to be traumatized by it if they so choose to, is probably intellectually and morally the most important thing, because the rate limiter right now to intelligence is courage. It's not IQ.
Point them at the door and say, it's open. You can walk through it. And I also want to say, because you said, hey, the litmus test for busted thinking sounds most like, are we even ready for disclosure?
Because you're negotiating yourself out of something that's already classified out the wazoo.
I agree. And it's already a reality, whether you want to be ready for it or not. But I would like to add to that, is anybody ever ready for love?
No. I mean, most people aren't.
Right.
I mean,
but it's there.
It's there.
You can't,
it's there.
Just because you can't handle it doesn't mean it's not there loving you. And I'm not saying these aliens are loving us at all. However, I am saying that there are realities that can be very uncomfortable and very awesome once we walk through that door.
And if you think about it, you know, the narcissism, since this has been a through line through this conversation, narcissism, unfortunately, is an early suicide committed by the child itself. But it's also a child that hasn't negotiated real mortality. So when you see narcissists actually, when they're faced with mortality, somebody that they love, whether it's a pet or a parent, you're really dealing with a child who still hasn't contended with actually mortality. I'm saying in the reaction, this is what you're witnessing. someone who hasn't walked through those stages that you and I have as a child. And if you're a parent, or if you become a parent, you're going to have to parent your child through this horrible ontological shock. And where you have raised your child in such a way that they're resistant to this ontological shock because they have created defenses of illusion and delusion against mortality, you have produced a narcissist. In other words, every narcissist, adult narcissist, is the product of abuse because a parent, one or more, has shielded them or quote unquote protected them from reality. So the protection of reality is an actual form of abuse. I just want to highlight that.
Sure. And that goes right back to stories of old being prohibited from knowing the truth.
Flying too close to the sun.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It's abusive to think that like telling people about the reality of the world or what's going on about our deception, it's abusive to try to convince people that there is such a thing as too much truth.
Yeah. Oh, they couldn't handle it. Hey, who are you to say?
Well, I'm saying the more we can't handle it, the more of an argument it is to reveal it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I agree. Yes.
And I am not saying that you need to strap somebody down and shove the truth down their throat. What I am saying, though, that you do need to allow for the option for somebody who voluntarily chooses to tune in and listen to you. You do need to allow for the possibility of offense by the truth. And this is the kind of censorship you shouldn't have at all. I'm not saying that it would be narcissistic if I said you need to make sure everybody listens to you, but you do need to be okay with the ontological shock. Otherwise, you think that humans don't have a right to grow, right? Like growth that you and I had happened, unfortunately, as a result of traumatizing ontological shock that we healed and we negotiated. And there's no way that you get both. The only alternative is that you become a narcissist and you become delusional and thereby abusive to others. So we're actually perpetuating abuse when we even suggest that we should be protected from reality just because we can't handle it, right? Like if I have I have two kids. I got to a point where when I decided that I wasn't going to tell them something, that I wasn't going to lie to them, that I'm going to say, hey, I will tell you the truth about this when you're older. Right now, for your own development, it's not responsible as a parent for me to tell you the complete truth about this. So I will tell you, but it's going to harm you if I tell you now, right? This is a way about being honest about the fact. This is the equivalent of saying, of our nation saying we keep secrets in order for national security.
Right.
We're not going to tell you the truth about where our troops are right now. Everybody understands we're out of war, right? This is the honest relationship that you have versus lying to your kids. Look, it went against went against what I wanted, but my son was lied to about Santa Claus. I wanted us to tell him the truth. The mother didn't want the uncomfortable social dynamics of our kid knowing the truth.
Yeah.
And the truth is, this was the wrong decision. What we should have done is that my son should have grown up watching what happens when some people are raised with the truth and other people are raised with deception. They experience an existential and ontological betrayal. And everybody who's experienced this betrayal of Santa Claus has had a rupture in their relationship to whatever they think God is or isn't, right?
Yeah, the magical world, right? Presents come down the chimney with a big fat dude and a beard, and he loves you every year as long as you're good. Yeah, no, that's absolutely.
Right.
I recall learning.
it affects everything, and now humanity is at a place where we're having a Santa Claus moment.
We are having a Santa Claus.
And what the government is doing is trying to kill Santa Claus while keeping the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy alive.
Yes.
That's exactly what it's doing. It wants to say, yes, aliens are here. No, there's no cover up. No, we haven't lied to you. Yeah, tech, sure. We're working on it. We're still learning. The government is trying to keep the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy alive while absolutely butchering Santa Claus to death and hopes that it can somehow get away with it, right? That it can slink out of the chimney, grab some milk and cookies, and it's still, everything's going to be fine.
Merry Christmas from your government. We'll see you. Not at Easter. That's not us. Right.
And I think what we need is both. We need grace for the fact that all of us have been avoidably and in many cases unavoidably deceived, that we've perpetuated in some of this, that we've all been useful idiots. And we also need some courage, and we need some healthy psychopathy. We don't just need healthy narcissism where we recognize truth is an ego developmental need, including ontological shock, but we also need some healthy psychopathy where we understand, as as Machiavellian as it sounds, ontological shock is going to be unavoidable on the path toward truth. And you might sound like some devious mastermind here, but we didn't decide the laws of the universe. We didn't decide to begin the cover up, and that the really good benevolent people are going to offend and absolutely psychologically traumatize people along the way. And the alternative is that we don't even have the fucking conversation, right? We either have stupid and or delusional people or manipulative people be the weakest link and censor the conversation for all of us who care about truth. Either that is going to dictate our censorship for humanity, or we're going to allow people who want to be delusional to see themselves out, to not be in the conversation. And some people who have the courage for truth, be traumatized, stick with it, and get to a silver lining. Because the real silver lining is, it looks like both is true. The world is way bigger than us. And unfortunately, it seems like we're special enough to parasitize. Like, we're, unfortunately, we might be so valuable that the world doesn't revolve around us, but a bunch of beings have chosen to enslave us.
Right. We are that valuable of a sauce. Yes.
And we're that powerful if we actually know what's going on, even if it's not in this life. And I really hope it is, because I don't want to be having this I don't want to be having this really important conversation 6,000 years from now. Which is the terrifying possibility
this
here.
Feels like an echo, I swear. No, yes.
I mean, let's get dark here, and I know we're running out of time. We need to end this. But the dark implication of this entire conversation is that if we fuck this up, you and I, our same souls might just be in different containers, maybe gray human hybrid containers that they've managed to. We might just be having the same damn conversation on different devices on whatever the next form is of the internet. If we don't break out of this cycle, and how do we move the conversation forward 6,000 years from now? Let's try to break out of the cycle at this point, because if it was impossible, we wouldn't be even facing any resistance, right? The fact that we have major resistance means, yeah, there is a chance that we can break out of the cycle.
Yes.
This cycle along, and if you avoid this conversation because it's too dark, you definitely don't break out of the cycle.
Yes.
You definitely don't develop advanced propulsion tech or figure out how the soul is trapped into DNA and some information system. You definitely don't break out of the simulation if the simulated programs themselves aren't even allowed to have the conversation. So the resistance to the conversation is a good sign. It's a sign that you have some sort of power that's dangerous to control in the first place. And even the ability to offend somebody with the truth, the very conversation you're trying to avoid, is probably the most hopeful part of the conversation, right? Like, people freaking out and trying to say that you're a bad person because you might traumatize people with the truth is the most hopeful sign that we have power that means anything, right? And that's really where, I'm portrayed as this big bad Hitler against the love and lighters. I'm actually a love and lighter. I just want people to actually take their love seriously. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
If I was a fatalistic person and I felt like we're all fucked and we couldn't do anything, I would be a love and lighter, and
right.
I would just
you wouldn't worry about it. I'll be love and light, right?
I would just say there's nothing you could do. Let the beings rape you and just embrace the 5D. I would be a love and lighter if I was a fatalist. I would. It would be the ethical thing. If I really thought, Douglas, there's nothing we can do, I would just be like, enjoy the moment, you know? But it's because I believe, unfortunately, that we do have a degree of meaningful free will. Unfortunately, I do believe that love sometimes means you need to fight for your loved ones, and hopefully not, but sometimes necessarily shed blood. It's because I believe that our power and our agency matters, that I have the contention that we are at war that is not of our choosing. And if you can't have the conversation, you definitely can't fight the war.
That's right. If you can't even acknowledge it, how can you pick up the weapon and fight?
And I do think, look, I do think what's going on is terrifying, but I don't think it's paralyzingly terrifying. I think it's close to paralyzingly terrifying. And I think we need to believe in courage.
Yes. Well, there are plenty of accounts where, and while they are not more so than the accounts of paralysis and abuse, there are accounts. I actually recorded a video and will be putting it up soon on Androfell's work, How to Defend Against Alien Abduction. There are accounts where people have successfully said, fuck off, and it works, or at least as far as they are aware.
And there are people, invoking the name of Jesus does work for some people. There are devout Christians like Fringe, an extraordinary experience for whom it doesn't work. And she is still finding ways to say fuck off in the abductions. It's just she's not getting the protective help that you would like. There are people who are literally, Abductee Journal, Amy, a friend of Fringe's who's been in the doom room herself. Literally, people whose vocation is the field of neuroscience, where they're taking things like galantine, something like that. I'll figure out what it.
Yeah.
Galantamine. Thank you. Where they're taking substances like galantamine in preparation for when they get abducted, so that they can fight back.
Nice.
So people are using, I dare say it, religious technologies. People are using their faith. People are using their science to fight back. And I think that should be the love and lighter perspective, that you're not a complete victim here. But I'm only D MerDaddy right now because that's the situation we're in. That's where we're transitioning. 5 years ago, I was still a tech bro, tech optimist, and I thought, everything is just going to get better and better and better. And now my view is, because everything is on the verge of about to be a singularity, there is a backlash. There's a phenomenon that whose immune system is allergically reacting because it doesn't want us to become adults from a technological perspective. So my perspective, my view is not fatalistic, and it is not. It is dark, but it is not fatalistic. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I'm absolutely pro love, pro free will, pro agency.
Pro take the medicine and get better.
Yeah. But I really want to make sure I hope I didn't leave anything on the table here, Douglas. If there's anything that you really wanted to express or I didn't answer, I am very frustrated, because I think we're at a stage where there are things that are actually very obvious, and the people who are even closest to the phenomenon sometimes seem to be the most hijacked. And so I don't know how to tell the world that there is a way to break out of the delusion, and it is not to invest in the belief of your own insufficiency. There's so many people I hearing in spaces right now, gifted remote viewers, who are like, we may never know. And they're literally remote viewing shit and having contact with aliens, and they're arguing in favor of ostensible perpetual human ignorance. I'm very frustrated for the very fact that our situation is avoidable, right? This is like, it's not going to be entirely our fuck up if you and I are talking again in 6,000 years. The blame isn't going to be all on us.
Right.
But it is also avoidable, right?
Well, if we can have the conversation, then so can others.
And I'm saying it's not just the conversation, like the actual fate of humanity, the worst fate possible, is still in a place where it's avoidable. And so even if 99% of it isn't our fault and we all get recycled again and we're way dumber 6,000 years from now, it will not have had to have gone that way in the future. There is a parallel universe where we do break out of this, and we can also just talk ourselves out of it. This is ours to lose and ours to fuck up,
Yes.
even if it's not entirely our fault.
Yes. That is a beautiful way to close this out. Now, I do want to say that you are, and I will be putting this out before it goes live, you've got yourself Dr. Heather Lynn coming up on a space on Thursday.
Yeah, will this be out before then? Do you
It
think people
should
will?
be, yes, that's the goal. The goal is to get
That
it
would be
out on
awesome.
Tuesday. And hey, the discussion about psychology, narcissism, the Annunaki, I know that she has written recently about July 9th, everybody. July 9th on X. The space will be with Dr. Heather Lynn, run by D MerDaddy. It will be amazing.
2 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, 2 p.m.
2
Eastern.
p.m.
It's live. You can tune in, which is interesting, right? Like, there's a real advantage to podcasts because you'll have more guests who will agree to a podcast that isn't live, where it's more curated. But there's also a bit of an internet charm that if you have a live thing like an X Space, that when you hear somebody fumble on a word, there's no going back on it, right?
It's live
And
radio. I really, it is an electric experience to listen to live. It's very cool.
I will tell you, there was a moment when we had our first space with Giorgiani, and Giorgiani is an intellectual powerhouse.
Big fan, yeah.
And I got to a place, I want to say 4 hours, 3, 4, maybe 5 hours in, where he maybe slipped and felt comfortable and revealed he knew a little bit too much about portals. And yeah, he took portals as in, and I'm like, wait a second, Jason, you said something that was kind of only possible if somebody had told you something about the real existence of portals, or if you had experienced them yourself. Have you seen a portal? I said something along those lines to him. This is live in the space. And the length of the pause from Jason was long enough to reset civilization several times over. Okay. And the lusciousness of that pause happening live, it's palpable when you have a recorded podcast that isn't live. But my God, when it's happening live, you hear the gears in Jason's mind negotiating. Oh my God, if I say this, then they'll know this. If I say that, then they'll know that. How much can I reveal? And I already can't go back in time, right?
The pause is only getting longer, right?
There's something beautiful about those moments happening live, because there's always a chance that disclosure might just happen right then and there.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? So yes, please tune in.
I'll be there.
Thank you, Douglas, and tune in. And it's going to be another one of those conversations where there's probably a lot where I disagree with Heather Lynn on, but if I don't create the environment where she can fully lay out her research and her view, then I'm not even having the conversation with her. I'm just having the conversation with some introject of hers that I want her to be, because I need my view to be supported, right? So I'm going to be on the opposite end of the table. For the first half of the conversation, maybe for the first 3/4, I'm going to be making sure that all of my thoughts and all of my disagreements don't even come up. I really want to understand what's in her head and what's in her research. And I'm really interested in her research because it's so disagreeing with what I think and what everybody else thinks. Does that make sense? Like,
Sure.
yeah. So,
and I look
think,
forward to hearing that conversation too. That's going to be cool. I think there is, at least from my reading, and I have enjoyed her Substack for several months now. She has some interesting overlap with what we've discussed today. So
she does.
The bits that bump against each other, I think, will create some fantastic sparks in the live. That's very cool.
Sorry, they do, and we've got to get over this idea in ufology that your heroes have to agree with you on everything, and unfortunately, we also need to get over this idea that your enemies are wrong about everything. Unfortunately, heinous, horrible, morally reprehensible people can still be intellectually right 1% of the time, or 100% about a very narrow field. That doesn't mean that you're ceding the moral high ground to them,
right? Or you're following them lockstep, right?
Or that you're following them morally, right? So this conflation between truth and morality, has got to end. If Hitler was here today, I would absolutely have him in the doom room. That doesn't mean I would be platforming his moral values.
Listen, I've got some ideas. I'm going to share them with you, okay?
Well, like, okay,
Just
let's be
hold on.
honest.
Yeah.
Don't you need, I mean, we don't know whether Hitler made these damn UFOs or not, but if Hitler were here today, I would have to have him in the doom room. Right? I would have to be like, what the fuck is going on with Die Glocke?
Right. Two words, Hitler,
Oh,
Die Glocke. Go. Right.
yeah. No, we're not doing any UFOs. We don't know.
We don't call them that, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Right? He would just be denying everything. Of course you would need to have that motherfucker in there. And that does not mean that I believe in genocide.
Right.
It means that the most dangerous conversation puts you at risk for other people telling you that you're a Nazi, which already happened several times, by the way.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. People are hijacked, but I want to say thank you for you even caring to have a conversation with me, man, and
My
for you
pleasure.
letting
Oh, thank you.
bloviate forever.
Well,
You know,
you've got such an incredible insight, and one that is just now, although you've been doing it for years on X Spaces, this careful consideration that is cutting is coming up, and it must come up now. If we are to advance the conversation past, do we even think we're ready, which is a non-starter to begin with. So I can't appreciate you enough for cracking my mind open all the more, and I am doubly appreciative for the avenues in which I will further get to explore what we can do about it, as we have begun to discuss here. And I definitely look forward to more of your spaces.
thank you so much. And I'm going to slightly twist your words. I doubly appreciate you, Douglas.
I'll take it.
And really thanks for having me on, man. And next space you're in the Doom Room, definitely come up and speak and let your voice be heard, so we can share your podcast as well, man. And thank you.
It'd be my pleasure. And if there is a time and a place, again, I would love to do this again.
Yes. If you want to follow up a continuation or a specific subject, especially as we lead into, disclosure, there's so many things that I haven't spoken on. For instance, the overlap of psychedelics, for some reason, the trend hasn't gotten there yet, but it still blows my mind years into it that we're not hearing from people like Timothy Ferris, Stanislav Grof,
Yes.
Paul Stamets. Is it
Paul
Paul?
Stamets? Yeah, Mushroom Man. Yeah. Awesome.
I was forgetting his first name there for a second. But all of these people, some of whom are still alive, the psychedelic luminaries. Oh my God, what's his name? Spirit molecule guy.
Bruce Lipton?
No, the guy who did the legal DMT experiment.
Oh,
here
I see the book cover in my mind.
You know who I'm talking about, right? That guy. All of these people, we have Andrew Gallimore coming out.
Rick Strassman. Got it. There we go.
Strassman. Thank you so much. Rick Strassman. And even Terrence McKenna's brother, right? I think it's David McKenna or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like he should be in spaces every day. I mean, why don't we have Dean Radin in a hot tub with Jack Sarfati and Andrew Gallimore vaping DMT on a space every single fucking day,
giving us a live
demonstrating
account.
psi phenomena.
Yes.
Oh, live. Why isn't that happening every day? So there's so many areas that I actually have a lot of thoughts on, and I haven't talked about them because they are timely. They're just not, people seem to not care about them. But whenever you want me back on, absolutely. And just thank you so much for caring and for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. And for the YouTube description, if you could just really highlight my X handle and the co-hosts Fringe and Tiff. They each have so much to add to the phenomenon, and I'm the DMT vaping psychedelic heathen. Fringe is the good Christian white woman, and I think that weird dichotomy, that crazy dichotomy, really symbolically encapsulates the need to have the weirdest and the most dangerous conversation, and that it can be had. without shit flinging, without this weird toxicity stuff.
I'd love to get
That
Fringe
it's
and
you,
everybody else on. I mean,
you should
yeah,
absolutely interview
love it.
Fringe.
Oh my God,
Yeah,
that's a
you
dream.
should absolutely. I'll reach out to her, and I'll see if she's open to coming on. But
I will send her
that's
a message too. Thank you. That's awesome of you. Thank you.
yeah, of course, man, of course. I mean, what are we doing here? Like we should only be supporting each other and making sure, because right now the most dangerous conversations are not being heard by the vast amount of people. The most interesting conversations are the least heard right now, and we probably are at a place where that's about to flip. We're probably like months away where we might actually see an inversion of this. So thank you for being part of that, man, and thank you for caring.
It's been an absolute pleasure, D MerDaddy. Thank you, Ulrich. You're a badass, and I look forward to more.
Likewise, man.
Peace.
Later, Douglas. Bye.
Oh, wow. What an episode. Super grateful to D MerDaddy Ulrich for bringing the sharp, deep thinking that he has. Not expecting to discuss narcissism on an interplanetary, intergenerational scale, interdimensional scale, but very thankful that we were able to touch upon that, because that hits to the heart of the matter, and we were able to address what we can do about it. And that will continue on as the conversation itself continues. But here we go, some percolation notes from the episode. Narcissism may in fact be induced, injected, incepted in us by the beings that took us down a peg or two in our current iteration and creation. And that narcissism exists in 1/6 of the population, that I did not know. Eyes open. The only way that traditional psychotherapy has found success in treating narcissism is through transference-focused psychotherapy, or TFP, where the patient projects their own relationship that they've had with an intimate partner onto the therapist, and then the therapist begins to experience what that partner experiences, and that some of the insights that the therapist gleans comes from counter-transference, as Ulrich explains, are the emotions split off from the narcissist that they don't want and sometimes can't physically feel, as well as particular thoughts that the therapist then experiences. Countertransference, as Ulrich explains, are when the therapist experiences the emotions that the narcissists have split off from themselves, that they don't want to feel, sometimes they can't feel, and the particular thought patterns that the therapist then experiences as their own. This kind of self-reflection develops insights about the patient in order to further the treatment. But this also is, and it's an interesting insight, Ulrich says that it is literally some kind of emotional and cognitive projection telepathy that they are employing. And this, actually, I noted, this has some very fascinating overlap with the method style of acting that I was brought into and trained in, the Stanislavski method in particular, but into Strasberg, and a little bit of Meisner. But yeah, this idea that the actor takes on the mindset and emotional life of the character and uses that to that filter set to execute on the objective in the scene and the story. So, like if I'm playing Batman, Bruce Wayne, I am taking on the emotional life of a person who lost their parents to criminal violence and also being terrified of bats as a kid, and focusing that entire existence that Bruce Wayne Batman has and resources as well on the singular goal of stopping what they could not as a child. How would someone act and react given that particular circumstantial, internal, external makeup and profile? Then you are acting as Batman. Pretty awesome. Pretty fascinating. D MerDaddy then goes on to talk about how he found that this narcissistic profile is interwoven into the very fabric of society, and that there is a through line tracing all the way back to the writings of the first or oldest known civilization on Earth, the Sumerians and their cuneiform tablets. I was legitimately blown away by that connection. That is a fascinating, dangerous thing to consider. Ufology has a kind of slave mentality in that we're begging for crumbs from our big daddy government. Meh. Though a lot of the community doesn't really give two shits about that. They just want the world to change. The basic change that would come about from confirmation would be that, people are no longer derided or subjugated to being less than in society for having these profound and oftentimes awful experiences, and that the accounts would not be relegated to the New Age section of the bookstore. The narcissist needs a control via censorship over reality, and that society seems to have a similar allergic reaction to genuine inquiry and individuation. We've got to look at this and ask what's really going on here. Yeah. That the difference of opinion by a narcissist outside of its predetermined lines of censorship is experienced as abusive, which, could explain that kind of allergic reaction that people have when you start genuinely questioning whatever it is you may be genuinely questioning. Why do we need a sign to tell us when and when not to walk? Do I not have the ability to do that on my own? And why are you going to ticket me if I make it across the street successfully when the blinky dude isn't blinky duding? Society shuns this differing from the norm and ostracizes, derides it, marginalizes it. When these predetermined boundaries are questioned, this becomes unacceptable behavior. Ulrich argues that this shows up in the 20 to 40,000 cuneiform tablets, and this extraterrestrial narcissism is slapping us in the face. What if this behavior set isn't even actually human, that it is something else? The recognition in the tablets of the relationship discussed in the tablets, the psychological relationship of envy, of pride, for total coercive control, not just of behavior, but of knowledge, of belief, of worship. These are all self-evident in the cuneiform tablets. That this is Munchausen by proxy love relationship between the Annuna and humans. And this has severe implications for modern disclosure. The pyramids on Earth, this was very interesting. There are pyramids on Earth, the Moon, Mars, that all have OCD-like precision. No hate on the OCD superpower. But the further that tech grows, Ulrich says, in complexity, the more ephemeral, the less physically lasting it gets. Why then were the pyramids built to last? Could there be a narcissistic pissing on trees component, as Ulrich said so well? Something chose to move granite hundreds of miles, as opposed to other material that would not have persisted. You could have built a pyramid out of anything. You could have pressed sand real hard, and it would have done the job. Or so I am assuming. I don't know. I don't know how to build pyramids, but he makes a very interesting point. Why move granite hundreds of miles when you really could have done it with anything? Like he says, you could have made titanium and built it via titanium. It just wouldn't have lasted. It would have served its purpose, unless its purpose was to last, and that there is some look at us, look at how awesome we are, bow down component to it. Ulrich briefly talks about how during narcissistic rage the pupils can go black and could be akin to possession, demonic or otherwise. It reminded me of Dr. Heather Lynn's writings on the spiritual advisors, referred to as the Abkalu in the Sumerian tablets. Could these beings, could these greys, could these possessors, these injectors of narcissism actually be the Abkalu? This is me just thinking off the top of my dome here, but could there be some intrinsic part of this narcissistic behavioral manifestation that is coming from not the human component, because maybe the Annunaki are actual humans from another planet, just like us? Could it be from the non-physical spiritual advisor? Could the Abkalu be associated with the Greys, or whomever or whatever may be behind them? And this was very interesting. If you are a post-scarcity civilization, where you want for nothing and live 100,000 plus years, what's the currency, right? What actually has any value within society? It's status and power. And even in Sitchin's writings, you see that status and power and vying for supremacy of domination over the human beings that they have created or at least meddled with and dumbed us down ends up in wars where whole cities are blown up. So then could the Apkallu seed technological breakthroughs? This is, again, me just off the top of my dome. Could they seed technological breakthroughs to purposefully fast forward a species and stunt their interior development, thereby inducing core narcissism, generating unnecessary high levels of trauma for them to feed off of? Is this the structure of the Loosh farm? Is technology the fertilizer? I loved what Ulrich said here. The currency becomes like a Real Housewives Bravo TV show. I mean, that's, yeah. 98.5% of the human condition is missing time, he also brings up. Fascinating. How is it that we can't actually look at that full-faced and say, yeah, most of the remnants of a high civilization, of any civilization at all, will not last the tests of time, especially if there are these cyclical catastrophes happening. I also like the breakdown of the fact that if they have psi, it's not like they don't know how to convey ideas. If they have psi, it's not like they wouldn't know emotions. Could they not behave in a more, hey, I'm here, I'm not from here, though, I'd like to chat, I think we could benefit each other kind of style? Could they do it in a nicer kind of way? In a clearer kind of way? So this is a decision by them to not communicate transparently. The phenomenon is weaponizing ambiguity. Thank you, Ulrich, for that insight. And this was a big one. The idea of a Loosh farm seems synonymous with narcissistic supply. Well, and just to clarify my most people aren't ready for love comment, love is truth, whether you're ready to accept it or not, just like the reality of parasitic NHI is truth, whether you're ready to accept it or not. But acknowledging that truth, that reality, is the first step in real growth and integration into a greater reality. And love is scary, okay? The NHI reality is scary. But it was C.S. Lewis who said, quote, "There is no safe investment. To love at all is to be vulnerable. To love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to tragedy, or at least to the risk of tragedy, is damnation. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and permutations of love is hell." C.S. Lewis, baby. And it is galantamine, not galantamine. I was wrong, but that was the drug that was being discussed, where the individual Amy Abductee Journal is talking about in order to fight back. Awesome. That right there is a very interesting tip. And remember the upcoming space with Dr. Heatherlyn on Thursday, July 9th at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. UTC. It is Doom with Dr. Heatherlyn. She is at Inanna Believe on X. That's INANNABELIEVE. I will put all the links, all the good links in the description. Absolutely check out the Doom Room itself. It's a very cool place where fantastic individuals get together, and there are some choice spaces from the past which you can listen to. Recommend, again, links in the description. And please do check out Ulrich on X. He is D MerDaddy, and I apologize if I butcher this, but at Ulrich Neujahr. It's ULRICHNEUJAHR. We also have the wonderful Fringe, fringe.com on X. That's FRINGEDOTCOM. As well as Stoned Ape. Stoned Ape is at STONEDAPE. All three of these people and many more are fantastic individuals, courageous, wonderful human beings that are at the tip of the spear discussing this very important information. And I am thrilled to listen to them every time, thrilled to enjoy these spaces, thrilled to promote them. Highly recommend getting in there and participating. Jump in. It's nerve-wracking for me too, but I'll be doing it. We got to. It was an absolute blast to have my mind blown open by Ulrich D MerDaddy, and I cannot appreciate you enough for hanging. Thank you, and thank you all for hanging, and I will catch you on the next one. All right.